The first thing Grace noticed when she opened her eyes wasn't the sterile white ceiling or the antiseptic smell that seemed to coat everything in sharp, medicinal clarity. It was the sound of steady breathing that wasn't her own, coming from somewhere to her left. She turned her head slowly, wincing at the dull ache that immediately bloomed behind her temples, and found herself looking at a man she'd never seen before in her life. He was asleep in an uncomfortable-looking chair beside her hospital bed, his dark hair slightly mussed, strong arms crossed over his chest. Even in sleep, there was something gentle about his face, something that made her want to keep looking. A white button-down shirt stretched across broad shoulders, and she noticed calluses on his hands. Working hands. Something about those hands stirred a feeling she couldn't name, like trying to remember a song she'd heard in a dream. "You're awake." His voice was warm honey and morning coffee as his eyes opened, immediately alert, despite having been asleep moments before. Those eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold, searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "How are you feeling?" Grace started, then stopped. The question felt too big, too complicated. How was she feeling? Confused, empty, like someone had taken an eraser to the inside of her mind and removed everything important. "Who are you?" The question hit him like a physical blow. She watched his face change, saw something crumble behind those careful eyes before he managed to compose himself. He leaned forward in his chair, hands clasped tightly together. "I'm Daniel," he said quietly. "Daniel Whitmore. I'm your friend, Grace. A close friend." Grace. The name felt right when he said it, like a key finding its proper lock. But, friend. She studied his face, the way his jaw tensed when he said the word, the way his eyes held secrets she couldn't read. Something felt incomplete about that word, like calling the ocean a pond. "What happened to me?" she asked. Before Daniel could answer, the door opened and a woman in a white coat entered, clipboard in hand. Dr. Patricia Chen was small and efficient, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She smiled as she approached the bed. "Miss Whitmore, I'm Dr. Chen. You've been unconscious for 3 days. You were in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit your vehicle. You suffered a severe concussion, but the good news is that all your other injuries are healing well. But I can't remember." Grace's voice trailed off. "You have what we call retrograde amnesia. The trauma affected your ability to access memories from approximately the last 5 years. Your earlier memories should be intact. Childhood, high school, college. 5 years. Gone." Grace closed her eyes, trying to reach into that blank space where her recent past should be. Nothing. It was like trying to grab smoke. "Will they come back?" Daniel asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Sometimes yes, sometimes no," Dr. Chen replied gently. "Memory is unpredictable. Some patients recover everything gradually, others in sudden flashes, and some..." She paused diplomatically. "Some learn to build new memories instead." After the doctor left, silence settled between Grace and Daniel like dust after a storm. She watched him, this stranger who wasn't quite a stranger, who looked at her like she was something precious and fragile that might disappear if he blinked. "Tell me about us," she said finally. "How do we know each other?" Daniel was quiet for so long that she wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, carefully chosen. "We met at the library. You worked there as a children's librarian." He smiled, and for the first time since she'd woken up, the expression reached his eyes. "You were reading to a group of kids, doing all the voices for the 3 bears. You had them completely mesmerized. And you were there because my niece Emma was in the group. She'd been having nightmares, and my sister thought story time might help." Daniel's voice grew warmer with the memory. "You were wearing this yellow sundress, and when you laughed, at something one of the kids said. I thought I'd never heard anything more beautiful." Grace felt her cheeks warm. There was something in the way he described that moment, something that made her wish she could remember. "What happened then? I asked you for coffee. You said yes." Daniel's smile faltered slightly. "Your family lives far away, California. They wanted to come, but with work and travel restrictions, they asked me to look after you during your recovery." Something about that explanation felt off, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong space. But Grace was too tired to examine why. Over the next few days, Daniel proved to be exactly the kind of friend anyone would want during recovery. He brought her books, flowers from what he said was her favorite shop on Millbrook's main street, and stories about their friendship that painted a picture of easy companionship. But Grace noticed things. The way he sometimes started to reach for her hand before stopping himself, how his voice caught when he said certain words, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. When she was discharged from the hospital, Daniel drove her to a house on Elm Street that he said belonged to a friend who was traveling. The moment Grace stepped through the front door, something shifted inside her chest. The living room felt familiar in a way that had nothing to do with memory. The way coming home feels when you've been away too long. "The guest room is upstairs," Daniel said, carrying her small bag. "I'll be staying in the spare room down the hall, just until you're fully recovered." The guest room was lovely, with pale blue walls and white curtains that filtered afternoon sunlight into soft gold. But as Grace looked around, she felt a strange sadness, as if she were seeing something that should have been different. "Daniel?" she called as he set her bag on the dresser. "Yeah?" "This house. It feels—" She struggled for the words. It feels like more than a friend's place." Daniel's shoulders tensed. "You've visited here before. We've spent a lot of time here together." That night, alone in the guest room, Grace couldn't sleep. She wandered the house in her pajamas, running her fingers along familiar surfaces. In the kitchen, she automatically reached for the coffee on the second shelf, as if her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. The refrigerator was filled with her favorite foods. How did Daniel know she loved strawberry yogurt and hated bananas? In the living room, she noticed spaces on the mantel where picture frames had obviously stood. Dust outlines marked their absence. When she asked Daniel about it the next morning, he said the homeowner had packed away personal items before traveling, but it was the closet in the master bedroom that stopped her cold. Daniel had gone to the hardware store, leaving her alone to explore. She hadn't meant to snoop, but the door was slightly ajar. Inside, among clothes that were clearly Daniel's, hung a single garment that made her breath catch. A wedding dress. Beautiful, elegant, with delicate lace sleeves and pearl buttons down the back. When Daniel returned, he found her sitting on the living room couch, the dress draped carefully across her lap. "Daniel." Her voice was very quiet. "Whose dress is this?" He stopped in the doorway, grocery bags in his hands. For a moment, he looked like a man caught in a lie, but then his expression smoothed. It belonged to the previous tenant. "The landlord asked me to pack it away, but—" He shrugged. "I forgot. I'm sorry if it upset you." Grace ran her fingers over the lace. "It's beautiful. She must have been very happy when she wore it." I'm sure she was. But as Daniel took the dress from her, Grace caught something in his eyes, not the casual indifference he was trying to project, but something deeper, something that looked almost like grief. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Daniel would leave for work early. He was a construction foreman, he'd explained, and return in the evening with stories about his day and questions about hers. They'd cook dinner together, and Grace marveled at how easily they moved around each other in the kitchen, like dance partners who'd been practicing the same routine for years. He took her to familiar places around Millbrook, hoping to trigger memories. The public library where she'd worked was a beautiful old brick building with tall windows and the kind of hushed reverence that made even children speak in whispers. The head librarian, Mrs. Henderson, was an elderly woman with silver hair and shrewd eyes, who seemed surprised to see Grace with Daniel. "Grace, dear, you look wonderful considering," she began, but Daniel smoothly interrupted. "Grace is still recovering, Mrs. Henderson. We're just visiting." The older woman looked between them with obvious confusion, but something in Daniel's expression made her nod slowly. "Of course. Take care, dear." As they walked through the children's section, Grace felt an almost physical pull toward the reading corner with its bright cushions and low shelves. Her hands moved instinctively to straighten books, and she found herself humming what Daniel told her was the song she always sang to help children settle down for story time. "I loved it here," she said, "and it wasn't a question. You did. The kids adored you." They went to Millbrook Diner next, a classic chrome and vinyl establishment that served coffee in heavy white mugs and pie that tasted like childhood. The moment they sat in what Daniel said was their usual booth, Grace felt that strange sense of rightness again. When the waitress, a tired-looking woman named Betty, came to take their order, Grace found herself saying, "Coffee black, and could I get extra cream on the side for him?" Daniel stared at her. Betty smiled. "Coming right up, hun." After Betty left, Grace looked at Daniel in confusion. "I have no idea why I said that." "I take my coffee with cream," Daniel said quietly. "Lots of cream. You always tease me about it, say I'm drinking coffee-flavored milk." "But how did I know that?" Daniel's smile was sad around the edges. Maybe some things are too deep to forget. That afternoon, they walked through Millbrook Commons, the town's central park, where ancient oak trees created cathedral spaces between their branches. Autumn was painting the leaves in brilliant reds and golds, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys. They were walking along the pond when Grace stumbled slightly on the uneven path. Daniel's hand shot out automatically to steady her, and for a moment they stood frozen, his palm warm against her elbow. The touch sent electricity through her entire body, and from the way Daniel's eyes widened, he felt it too. "I'm sorry," he said, dropping his hand as if he'd been burned. "Don't be." Grace's voice came out softer than she'd intended. Thank you." They continued walking, but something had shifted between them. Grace found herself hyper-aware of Daniel, the way he moved, the sound of his breathing, how his hands swung just inches from hers as they walked. She wanted to reach for him, to close that small distance, but every time she almost worked up the courage, she remembered that he was just her friend. Friends didn't feel this way about each other, did they? That evening, Grace's sister Margaret arrived from Boston. She was older than Grace by 5 years, with the same blonde hair but sharper features and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. The moment she walked through the front door, tension filled the air like smoke. "Grace, honey, how you feeling?" Margaret hugged her sister, but her eyes were on Daniel and they weren't friendly. "I'm doing well. Daniel's been taking wonderful care of me." "I'm sure he has." Margaret's tone was carefully neutral, but Grace sensed undercurrents she didn't understand. Later, Grace heard raised voices from the kitchen. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Margaret was angry about something, and Daniel was defending himself. When they returned to the living room, both wore forced smiles. "I should go," Margaret said. "But Grace, I want you to know that if you need anything at all, you can call me." After Margaret left, Grace asked Daniel what they'd argued about. "She's worried about you staying here with me. She thinks maybe you should go to Boston, be with family during your recovery." "Do you think I should?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I think you should do whatever feels right to you." "This feels right," Grace said immediately, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Being here with you. It feels like where I'm supposed to be." The relief on Daniel's face was so profound that Grace wondered what exactly he'd been afraid of. But that night, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being kept from her. She thought about Margaret's angry voice, about the missing pictures on the mantel, about the way Daniel sometimes looked at her like she was breaking his heart just by existing. She began to pay closer attention to small details. Daniel's mail, which came to the house, the way he moved through the rooms like he'd lived there for years, how he knew exactly where everything was kept. The wedding dress in the closet that supposedly belonged to a previous tenant. But why would someone leave something so valuable behind? The pieces of the puzzle began forming a picture Grace wasn't sure she wanted to see. The revelation came on a rainy Thursday morning while Daniel was at work. Grace was looking through a desk drawer for a pen when her fingers closed around a folded document. She almost put it back without looking, but something made her unfold it. It was a marriage certificate. Grace Whitmore and Daniel James Whitmore, married 3 years ago in Millbrook's First Presbyterian Church. Her hand shook as she read it again, making sure she wasn't imagining things. They weren't just friends. They were married, husband and wife. Grace sank into the desk chair, the certificate trembling in her hands. Everything suddenly made terrible, perfect sense. The way he looked at her, the familiarity of the house, because it was her house too. The wedding dress in the closet wasn't from a previous tenant, it was hers. The missing pictures on the mantel had probably shown their life together. Daniel had been lying to her from the moment she woke up in that hospital bed. When Daniel came home that evening, he found Grace sitting at the kitchen table. The marriage certificate placed carefully in front of her. His face went white when he saw it. "Grace, how long were you planning to keep this from me?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. Daniel sat down heavily across from her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain drummed against the windows, and the kitchen felt smaller somehow, charged with tension. "Forever, maybe," he said finally. "I don't know. Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Grace now realized she'd seen him do countless times. "Because I was terrified." "Of what?" "Of you staying with me because you felt obligated. Because some piece of paper said you should." Daniel's voice broke slightly. "Grace, when you woke up in that hospital and looked at me like I was a complete stranger, it nearly killed me. But then I thought, what if this is a chance? What if I can make you fall in love with me again? Really fall in love, not because you're supposed to remember loving me, but because you choose to." Grace stared at him. "So you decided to lie to me instead." "I decided to give you the freedom to choose." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Every moment we've spent together, every laugh, every look, that's been real. That's been you choosing to be with me, not because you remember that you're supposed to love me, but because you want to." But it was built on a lie. Was it? "Grace, tell me honestly, how do you feel about me?" The question hung in the air between them. Grace closed her eyes, thinking about the past few weeks, the way her heart raced when Daniel walked into a room, how she looked forward to his return from work each day, the comfort she felt in his presence, the way everything felt right when they were together. "That's not the point," she said finally, "isn't it? You took away my choice to know the truth. I gave you the choice to love freely." Grace stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I need time to think. I need you to leave tonight." Daniel's face crumpled, but he nodded. "Where should I go? I don't care, just not here, not tonight." After Daniel left, Grace walked through the house she now knew was hers, seeing it with new eyes. In the master bedroom, their bedroom, she found evidence of their shared life, carefully hidden away. A box under the bed containing photographs, their wedding day, vacations, quiet moments at home. She was smiling in all of them, and the way she looked at Daniel in these captured moments left no doubt about her feelings. In another box, she found cards and letters. Birthday wishes, anniversary notes, little love letters that Daniel had apparently written her throughout their marriage. His handwriting was strong and sure. Grace, you make ordinary moments feel like magic. 3 years married, and I still get butterflies when you walk into a room. I love you more today than yesterday, but not as much as I will tomorrow. Grace sank onto the bed, surrounded by evidence of a love story she couldn't remember but could feel in every photograph, every written word. The woman in these pictures had been deeply, completely happy. And Daniel, God, the way he looked at her in these photos was the same way he'd been looking at her for the past few weeks. She thought about Dr. Chen's words. Some learn to build new memories instead. Was that what Daniel had been trying to do? Give them both a chance to build something new instead of trying to recover something lost? Grace spent the night reading Daniel's letters, studying photographs of a life she'd lived but couldn't recall, and slowly understanding began to dawn. The next morning she called Dr. Chen. Doctor, I have a hypothetical question. If someone had retrograde amnesia and their spouse decided not to tell them they were married, would that be psychologically harmful? Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. That's quite a hypothetical, Grace. But theoretically, if the amnesia patient was developing genuine feelings based on present interaction rather than forced recollection, it might actually be healthier. Memory recovery can't be forced, and pressure to remember often inhibits natural emotional development. So theoretically, this person might actually be better off not knowing. In some cases, yes. The brain finds its own ways to heal. Sometimes the most therapeutic thing is simply allowing new connections to form naturally. After hanging up, Grace sat in her kitchen, their kitchen, thinking. She thought about the past few weeks, about how every interaction with Daniel had felt genuine and new. She thought about the electricity she'd felt when he touched her, the way her heart had started racing whenever he smiled at her. None of that had been based on obligation or memory. It had all been real, present, chosen. Daniel had given her something precious, the chance to fall in love with him all over again, freely and completely. She found him at Millbrook Pond, just as the sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and amber. He was sitting on their bench. She knew now it was their bench, though she couldn't remember the first time they'd sat there together. "Hi," she said softly. Daniel looked up, hope and wariness warring in his expression. "Hi. Can I sit?" He nodded, scooting over to make room. They sat in silence for a while, watching ducks glide across the still water. "I read your letters," Grace said finally. Daniel's hands clenched in his lap. "Grace! And I looked at our pictures. We looked happy. We were. I can't remember being that woman. I can't remember our wedding day or our first apartment or any of the things that made us who we were together." Daniel's shoulders sagged. "I know. But Daniel!" Grace turned to face him. "I don't think I want to be that woman again." He looked at her in confusion. "That woman fell in love with you because of circumstances, timing, whatever brought you together 3 years ago. But I, the person I am right now, I fell in love with you because of who you are today, because of how gentle you were when I was scared and confused, because of how you make me laugh, because being with you feels like coming home to a place I've never been but have always been looking for." Daniel's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Grace, you gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You let me choose you freely, completely, without obligation or expectation, and I do choose you. Not because some certificate says I should, not because I'm supposed to remember loving you, but because I love you right now in this moment as the person I am today." Daniel reached for her hands, and this time Grace didn't hesitate to take them. His touch felt like electricity, and coming home and every good thing she'd ever wanted all at once. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure, but I want to do this right. I want you to court me properly this time. I want first dates and stolen glances and all the things we might have rushed through before. I want to build something new with you." Daniel's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Grace. Whitmore, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night?" "I would love that, Daniel Whitmore." As they walked back toward town, hands intertwined, Grace realized that she wasn't the same woman who had lost her memory in that car accident. She was someone new, someone who had been given the extraordinary gift of choosing her own love story. And she had chosen well. The past was gone, perhaps forever, but the future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten book, full of infinite possibility. And for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, Grace felt truly, completely whole. Behind them, the sun set over Millbrook Pond, painting everything in gold. And ahead of them, their shadows walked together toward whatever tomorrow would bring, finally ready to begin again. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please support the channel, subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments so you don't miss the next episodes. See you in the next story.